everybody, so today I'm going to show you my cheaty Christmas wreath using a cheaper supermarket wreath base, which has already been covered in some lovely fur. A couple of pine cones came with it, and I also had a little ribbon that came with it too, which I've taken off for the moment and I might add in later. And I'm just going to show you how you can pimp up this was £10, a £10 wreath, and make it look like a really bigger, luxurious, gorgeous Christmas wreath using foliage from the garden or foliage that you can pick up quite cheaply elsewhere. So I'm going to be using laurel because I have plenty of laurel in my garden, and it's a lovely shiny evergreen leaf and looks quite rich, I think. Lovely and voluptuous. And I've just started putting little bundles together, so I'm using a thick gauge florist wire, which you can get online or from local florists or even some garden centres, and I'm just wrapping a couple of pieces together. So I snip a sort of top bit and then put it against a section that was further down, just to make it look like a nice thick piece when it's on, a nice lovely thick piece together. So I'll be cutting this off here and then marrying it up with this one that's got the lovely tip of foliage in it, putting them together and binding them like I have here to make it look like one nice big thick piece. And then I'll be feeding it into the wreath, following the line of how the foliage has already been put on, so it'll be going that way round. And I'm going to make this one quite thick, so I made one for a client the other night that was a little bit thinner, just to suit budget, and I'm going to make mine a little bit thicker, put a bit more laurel into it. And then I'm also, when I've done the laurel base, I'm going to be adding in some lovely holly with the berries on, obviously very festive. And I'm also going to put in some of my dried hydrangea heads from the autumn. These are my hydrangea paniculata limelight that I dried earlier on in the season. I'm going to add those in along with some cinnamon sticks, and then add in some faux berries because the birds may well go for some of these off the wreath when it's outside, and also they do drop off naturally as well. So just to make sure we've got coverage for the whole season and enhance the berries, I will put in the odd faux berry wired in, just to make sure our lovely festive red berry stays through the whole season. So I'm going to start off with a lovely layer of the laurel. The reason I like to do this, I do and can do wreaths from scratch, which is lovely to do if you've got the time. This for me, I'm just showing you as a complete cheap way if you haven't got loads of time to fiddle around with moss and wires and whatever. These fantastically made straw-based wreaths from supermarkets, you see them everywhere, and some garden centres do them as well. It's just a good way to get you started because all you've got to do basically is make it look fabulous. So it's like the detail at the end, rather than having to do all of the mossing or the strawing, building up the base, then building up the foliage, and then going round for really thick lovely foliage. So this is just a great way to sort of add on and pimp up a nice cheaper wreath and make it your own, and make it easy as well, because there's a lot going on around Christmas. We don't always have a lot of time. So I'm going to crack on with that and show you what it looks like with the first layer of laurel on. Just to show you before I carry on, the bundle of laurel, I have poked through the straw base, or maybe it's the moss base for you, poked through the straw base, and then what I tend to do is to bend it over, make a little hook on the end. Whoops, see if I can do this one-handed. So I've got a little hook on the end, and then I push it in, back in to the base of the wreath, and that just helps secure it in nice and tightly into the base. And then once it's in, and I've done a few, because it's wired, you can manipulate it round any way you like. So you can pull it up, you can pull it down, and that's nice and secure in the wreath there. So there we go, you can see the wires there poked back into the straw, and the straw's a nice tight base. Perfect. So I'm going to do that all the way around with the wreath, with the laurel, around the wreath, and keep poking it in. Sometimes if it's a straw base that you're using, I actually prefer them because they tend to be more secure. They're thicker packed, which means when you poke things through, they tend to hold better. If you do a moss base, unless it's really crammed in moss, it's better to bind the wire around each bit of foliage as you go over, rather than doing the method that I'm using, which is the bundles and then poking it through. The straw tends to hold it better if you're doing my method currently here, but sometimes it can be too thick. So if it's too thick, and it won't go through, then I tend to use the wires, the binding wires that the people who made this used, and just wrap it round and poke it through that, and then on a bit of foliage instead. So the great thing about wiring on is that you can either poke it through or wire it onto existing wires, or even onto a strong bit of foliage if you're struggling to poke it through the straw, because the straw can be quite thick. But there's ways and wills around getting it done if you do get stuck, which is why I quite like this method when you've already got a pre-built base, because you can just poke in foliage as and where you think it needs it to make it look thicker. But you can see by putting that one in, I've already stretched out the size of this wreath already. So just imagine when we get around the whole ring, it's going to look really fantastically big and amazing. And this is basically, other than the cost of the wires, which I bought a pack of 2 years ago, and I've still got plenty to last me another couple of years off eBay actually, it's such a cheap wreath to do because the foliage is already in my garden and that was free for me to cut. So you can see how we're going to build this wreath looking beautiful, even with just the first bit of bundling. A lovely, cheap and easy way to start looking good. But I'll carry on and I'll show you how we're going. So I'm just going to show you quickly how I bind my pieces of foliage together. So for the laurel, I've got a thicker piece and not a tip, which is cut further down the stem of the laurel branch, and then the tip of a laurel branch, slightly thinner stem. And I'm going to place the tip on top of the midway point, put them together, and then you can see a nice sort of thick piece of foliage is created. And then holding the stems together as best as you can, put a bit of the thicker gauge florist wire, leaving a longer tail one side and a smaller tail the other, and you want to really pinch together as you go round with your fingers and thumb. Pinch, 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 as close and as tight as you can with the wire and the stems, going down so far, leaving a nice fairly long stem that end. And you can see how nice and tightly wrapped round the wire is at this end. And then with the shorter tail, you just go around again, pinching nice and tightly against the wire, that little end piece, and that's nicely wrapped with a nice bit of a tail. And that's the bit that we're going to poke, as I showed you earlier, that we poke into the back, well, from the front to the back of the wreath, and then we pincer round into a little hook and push through. So that's how I do this for my binding method of bundles of my bundle method for the bundles of foliage that are going to stick into the wreath. So this is rather than the binding method, which a lot of people use and works really well, but this is the other alternative when you're using a pre-made wreath like I am today. So my cheaty wreath, you just want to put bundles in. This is how you make your bundle of any kind of foliage of your choice, or flowers even. You can do this with flowers in the summer with flower wreaths, and that's how you bundle them together to then push them through the straw or moss base, and then you can pinch it in. And actually, if you're doing a binding wreath, so using wire and binding bundles of foliage as you go, if you find you've got gaps, you can use the bundle method just to fill in the gaps and then poke this through your moss wreath that you've made already. So if you are using a binding wreath and want to fill gaps, you could also do this as well. So I just wanted to show you how I was binding those things together, and I do this with all the foliage that I'm using. So I'll do this with the holly pieces as well. I'll do this with my hydrangea heads, but use a smaller gauge. So if you're putting anything in with a thinner stem, use a smaller gauge florist wire, because it won't dig into the foliage and break it as much, into the stem and break it as much. So for my hydrangea heads, the stems on these are a lot thinner and more breakable, so I use a thinner gauge wire to wire them up so that the wire doesn't stick in them and then break the actual stem. So that's just worth bearing in mind for thick stems like hollies, evergreen shrubs, laurels. With thicker stems, woodier stems, use the thick gauge wire. For smaller, thinner woody stems, or soft, I can't speak this morning. For smaller, softer stems, use a smaller gauge florist wire so that it doesn't dig in and break. So that's just my little tip for bundling and wiring for your wreath. So here we go. That's our first layering. I have to hold my camera up quite high because you can see how much bigger I've made this wreath by adding in the laurel. You could do this with any evergreen foliage, so viburnum, skimmia for instance. I like to use the laurel because it's bigger leaf and it gives you an instant, very quick look of a much larger wreath. So if I was using smaller leafed green foliage, I might have to make more bundles or make my bundles thicker or put the bundles closer together, which would take more time. So I'm just purely saying I'm just being lazy today, basically. By using the laurel, you very quickly get a fuller wreath, a thicker wreath and a wider wreath, but with fairly minimal effort compared to using smaller intricate foliage. So if you wanted to use smaller intricate foliage and you still want to be a little bit lazy like me because you've got loads of stuff going on at this time of the year, use laurel and then add in smaller leaf foliage, so maybe some box or even a bit of lavender or rosemary or viburnum, which is slightly bigger but not as big as laurel. You could infill more gaps and make it even thicker by going round around the edge. So what I'm actually going to do is just use holly because it's got the lovely berries on, but of course it's got the beautiful evergreen foliage as well. And I'm just going to dot that through in between where the laurel is, and then sort of not quite midpoint but just there, so that you can still see the fur, but it's just going to poke through and add that pop of red and nice, well, textural foliage, I suppose, to go against that. So that'll look lovely. And then I'll show you what that looks like, and then I'll pop the hydrangea heads on and some cinnamon sticks if I've got room for them. But yeah, this is just lovely. I think wreaths are brilliant because you can just add in and make it your own. So you can add in what you want and completely make it your own. But this is just a principle and a guide on how you can get there, but you can swap out the foliage for anything you like out of your garden that you prefer the look of. Right, so let's pop the holly in. So just to show you again very quickly with a different bit of the foliage that I'm putting in my holly, I've just snipped out of a lovely bunch. I've just snipped sections of the foliage part, the holly berry part, and I'm going to use the same principle that I've just done with the laurel. So I'm going to use the foliage piece as the backer, and of course the berries need to be on the front really, although the foliage does poke around quite a bit on the old holly berries there. And I'm just going to put the two stems together like I did with the laurel, and I'm still using the thick gauge wire because it's fairly thick stemmed. So hold it and pinch it together as much as you can, as close as you can. Shorter tail, longer tail for wrapping. There we go. So pinch, 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 pinch and move and squiggle round. Not as easy because the stem is a bit shorter here. So I'm wrapping it up and down actually as we go. There we go. Poke a little tail, long tail, short tail at the top, then wraps round just to secure. And just mind the ends of the wires because they can be quite sharp. So there you go. So that's another little bundle wrapped up with a little tail. Two pieces put together. I might just trim that edge off. It's a little bit higher and doesn't look so pretty. So I might just trim it off closer to the berry to tidy it up. In fact, let's do that now. So take my trusty secateurs, which are also a lovely festive red. And we're going to snip in as close as we can. There we go. That's tidied that up a lot better, hasn't it? And so that's how you can manipulate and cut little pieces and put them together to make them look like they should be together, sort of, in a very rustic manner. And there we go, let's carry on. So there we go, I've just carefully dotted the holly bundles around and about my wreath, nice and evenly. I've left a slightly wider gap up here because this is probably where I'm going to be hanging it from, because at the moment we're looking at this upside down really, but that's where it'll be hung up from, and that will be the bottom. Yeah, so nicely spaced out. To be fair, the holly berries that I got from my local farm shop, really good, really good. So they are looking lovely. And now what I've just remembered is, coming out here, I've bought some mistletoe. So I'm actually going to put a few little bundles of that in as well. So nice red and white sort of themed colours to go alongside my holly. So let's bundle that up and get that stuck in as well. Oh, this is looking so much better than I actually thought as well, guys. This is amazing. So I've infilled a couple of the gaps. I've just got 3 bunches in between two of the hollies and one below, and then I'm leaving the top bit, as I said earlier, for my bow and my ribbon to tie it on and up to the hook. Yeah, it's looking lovely. So, okay, not all of this foliage out in my garden. If you're lucky enough to have holly, that would be free. Mistletoe you obviously buy. Now I bought the mistletoe and the holly from a local farm shop, a huge bunch, which has lasted, so I've been able to do about 3-4 different wreaths, plus a bit for extra decoration, plus a bit for my mistletoe to go over our door, and they were £1.99 each. I mean, this is 2023, it might change if it's later down the road that you watch this in years to come, but I mean, it's not expensive considering how much I got for my money, and that I can use it sparingly, and it looks great, use it for other wreaths for other people that I'm gifting, and use it in my house. So the wreath itself, 10 quid, and then £1.99 for massive bunches. I mean, I'll show you what I've got left. Big old bunch, plus what I've just shown you in the wreath. And then the same with the holly, very similar size, and the holly berries are amazing. But obviously if you're lucky enough to have holly or know someone who has holly in the garden, that would be free to cut, of course. My laurel was free, that's out of my own garden. So you can see this is looking great, I think, obviously subjective depending on what you like, but sort of a more traditional but luxurious traditional wreath. And I like using the laurel because, as I said earlier, it's a quick way of padding out a wreath without a lot of fuss. And because we've got the lovely fir base, I've only had to use bits of holly and then infill with mistletoe, which looks instantly great because it's got that lovely open growth habit. So it fills a gap beautifully. The pine cones came with the wreath, so they fill a gap already for me without me even doing anything. And you can see how quickly this is coming together. Now this is flat. Once it's up, I will manipulate the laurel a bit more because some of it, you know, is skewiff, but because it's wired, you can manipulate it, fan it, push it out in the way that you want to make it look more even. But look how amazing that looks. Now something of that sort of size with the trimmings that I'm going to put on, so I'm going to put a couple of cinnamon pieces in here and there, and I think I might go for hydrangea still. Let's just have a look, because the hydrangea might be the wrong look. So I was thinking of putting a couple in maybe there. See, I'm thinking, whether is that going to work? I'm not sure. For this style of wreath, I'm not sure the hydrangea heads are going to work. I might have a fiddle. Oh, that might work there. It's a nice centerpiece at the bottom, and then with some cinnamon sticks around it. Yeah, I might still do that. So I might put 3 heads in, 1 at the bottom or maybe 3 with the mistletoe. And again, they were free because I cut and dried them in autumn for my own garden. And that's how quick you can get a lovely, luxurious looking wreath for a fraction of the cost. So something of this size with the bits I'm putting in, sorry, this is what I was just about to say, would probably cost you between 50, 60 quid, maybe even 70, depending on where you are in the UK. And when you actually watch this, because this is filmed in 2023. But yeah, that sort of size wreath would look and cost a fortune compared to doing it on a slight budget with a few bits and bobs picked up locally and cheaply and cut out my own garden. So let's pop these hydrangea heads in and some cinnamon sticks, and then we'll get the ribbon on, ready to hang it up. Right, there we go. That is complete for me. The hydrangea heads are a little hit and miss, but I quite like that it's a little bit rustic. So I've popped in 3 in the end to sort of make a little bit of a triangle. And I'm just putting 1 little bundle of cinnamon in just there. I feel if I do any more, it's going to go over the top, which is never a bad thing. You can feel free to go over the top. But I think I am ready personally now just to pop my little bit of gingham ribbon at the top. And then we're going to attach it. I might put the bow back on, actually, because I think that might just, yeah, make it look really festive. So I'm going to tie that back on, pop the gingham ribbon on, and I will show you what it looks like when it's hung up on our window outside. But I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Give me a thumbs up, but also comment down below on anything else festive you'd like me to do, whether it's this year or ready for next year, festive DIYs. And of course I will look into doing it. But I hope you enjoy it. I hope you have a fabulous Christmas, but do just watch to the end so you can see what this looks like hung up. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and don't forget to subscribe to watch and see more of my videos as I put them on. Have a lovely Christmas and a happy new year.